I've been asked many times, what do you define prayer as? And really, prayer is your relationship with God. If you don't communicate with me, then we really don't have much of a relationship. If you don't communicate with your spouse, you don't have much of a relationship or a marriage. So really, prayer is your relationship with God. The greatest prayer is this: help! You might say, well, I'm not educated, I don't know enough theology. The greatest prayer is just saying, God, help me. And from Colossians chapter 1, verse 9 to 14, we see this classic passage of how Paul prayed that I believe could be a guide for all of us today. First, Paul's prayers are marked by a sense of urgency. Go back to verse 9. It says, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. I ask us today, are our prayers marked with a sense of urgency? In Ephesians 6:12, Paul says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. In other words, that we live in spiritual warfare. How can we fight this spiritual warfare without a sense of urgency? Jesus shares a parable of the persistent widow in Luke 18, 3 through 5. And says, and there was a widow in the town who kept coming to him with a please, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about me, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. She just wouldn't quit. He said, enough already. I'm tired. Just think, this story could also represent our coming to God. That God really sees the urgency of our heart. You know, I make it a habit to pray for my food before I eat. And I've been in a restaurant and we'll bow and pray. And, and I've always amazed that most people don't pray before they eat. Someone once said, even pigs grunt before they eat. But they have no thought of giving God thanks. But how many times have you prayed before and wondered, did we pray? Prayer can become so routine. We get down on our knees to pray, and the next thing we know, we're sound asleep. And our attitude towards God, there must be this incessant prayer, an incessant coming before the throne of God. Paul says, I have not stopped praying for you. But secondly, Paul's prayers are marked by intensity. Notice back in verse 9 of Colossians 1, we continually ask God. What would happen if God's people would have a sense of intensity? In Luke 8, the woman with the issue of blood that was crawling on her knees, that she had suffered for 12 years and pushed her way through the crowd, it says, and she touched the hem of the garment of Jesus, and Jesus stopped in the midst of this crowd, and he said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. I wonder if the churches of the SoCal Network and the people that attend those churches, if Jesus would stop today and say, someone in Southern California touched me, for I know power has gone out from me. But the final part of this that marks the characteristics of Paul's prayer is that Paul's prayers are marked by unity. Notice back in verse 9 of Colossians 1, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you. We. Now there's power in praying in your closet. That needs to happen, but there's no substitution for corporate prayer. We pray. When I was graduating junior high school and ready to go to high school, I was about 4'11", about 96 pounds, and I wanted to play football. Well, you can imagine the coach looking at me and kind of giggling. And of course, they had varsity, they had junior varsity, And then they had what was called a B team. Bs, they called them. And because I was so small, I didn't qualify for junior varsity, so they put me on the B team. And I sat on the bench on the B team. And maybe at the end of the game, when we were losing by a great amount, or we were winning by a great amount, the coach would say, Guerra, go in there. And let me tell you, when he'd call my name, I would run on that field like I was an All-American. I knew I was the smallest guy in the field. But to me, I was an All-American. I played like an All-American. I never touched the ball. Maybe I never made a tackle. But boy, to me, on that field, I was an All-American. I will never be a Billy Graham. I will never be, a great missionary like Mark Montaigne or a great pastor. But I still see myself when I get on the field, even though I'm the smallest guy on the field, then I'm an All-American. That my life counts, that my prayer counts, that what I do for God counts. See, I believe in the sovereignty of God. In other words, God's going to do what he's going to do. But over and over in Scripture, we're asked to knock and keep knocking, seek and keep seeking, ask and keep asking. God says in Jeremiah 33:3, call to me, and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. To me, friend, that's call with a sense of urgency. Call to me, God says, with intensity, and call to me with a sense of unity. And that's what we want to do today.